The Ordnance BL 60-pounder was a British 5-inch heavy field gun designed in 1903–05 to provide a new capability that had been partially met by the interim QF 4.7-inch gun. It was designed for both horse draft and mechanical traction and served throughout the First World War in the main theatres. It remained in service with British and Commonwealth forces in the interwar period and in frontline service with British and South African batteries until 1942, being superseded by the BL 4.5-inch medium gun. History, origin and use. The effective use of modern heavy field guns by the Boers during the Second Boer War was a revelation to armies in Europe, including the British. They were impressed by the mobility and range. Britain used some heavy guns in that war under ad hoc arrangements. After the capture of Pretoria in 1900, Lord Roberts, the commander-in-chief in South Africa, had stated the requirements of a heavy field gun: a range of 10,000 yards, weight behind the team of no more than 4 tons, and the largest possible shell. Accordingly, the Ordnance Committee in London ordered experimental guns and 3 were trialled. However, in 1902 the Heavy Battery Committee was formed, comprising officers experienced with heavy and siege artillery in South Africa and presided over by Colonel Perrott, who had commanded the siege train there. In early 1903 the first report dismissed the 4.7-inch and the 30-pounder from further consideration because they lacked firepower. Of the 3 trial guns, they accepted the Armstrong design but rejected all 3 carriage designs. New designs were sought that were easier for detachments to use. 1904 trials with a new design, including both horse and mechanized towing, resulted in further changes, but in 1905 the design for the BL 60-pounder was accepted, although it was still a half-ton over the target weight. Unfortunately, in 1900 the Secretary of State for War had announced a plan to give volunteer position batteries 4.7-inch guns. He also extolled the merits of 4.7, and in 1902 and 1903 Parliament voted to equip 60 volunteer batteries with a 4.7-inch. Despite the 60-pounder being in development, the 4.7-inch had many weaknesses as a field equipment, but it had captured the public's imagination. However, in 1903 a heavy brigade RGA was formed by converting 3 siege companies and equipping them with 4.7-inch guns. The following year a second brigade was formed from 3 more RGA companies. These regular army brigades were part of the Corps Artillery, although their equipment was an expedient. The 60-pounder gun was used on most fronts during the First World War and replaced the 4.7-inch guns. At the outbreak of war they equipped with 4 guns, the heavy battery RGA in each infantry division. In 1916 all batteries on the Western Front started being increased to 6 guns. By this time heavy batteries had ceased to be part of each infantry division and batteries became part of what were eventually called heavy artillery groups with several batteries of different types. After the First World War they equipped medium brigades, later regiments. Production by the outbreak of war in 1914-41 guns had been produced, 13 being in Canada and India. Armstrong were the main supplier, with Vickers and the Ordnance Factory Woolwich also producing complete equipments. Major assemblies including barrels were also produced by many other companies. Total wartime production was 1,773 guns and 1,397 carriages. Description: general features. The 60-pounder was a heavy field gun or gun of position, designed to be towed by either a horse team or mechanical vehicle. It had a quick-firing recoil, meaning that the carriage did not move when the gun fired. The barrel was a wire-wound A-tube in a jacket with a screw breech. It fired a separate round. The lower carriage comprised a box trail. It was designed for one man laying with both traverse and elevation sights and controls on the left. Recoil system was below the barrel and used a hydraulic buffer with a hydro-pneumatic recuperator to return the barrel to its firing position. Initially, the 60-pounder was fitted with tangent sights on a rocking bar with the range scale graduated to 10,400 yards and 22 degrees. The rear sight had a deflection scale. Before the First World War, it was fitted with oscillating sights, using the older number 5 sighting telescope on either side, oscillating BL 60PR Mk2, which included a sight clinometer and range scale as well as a deflection drum for the telescope. This was replaced by the number 3 carrier for the number 7 dial sight. Mk2 Gun on Mk2 Carriage. The original 1904 Gun.It carriage was designed for the gun barrel and recoil mechanism to be moved rearwards on its carriage when traveling. This was intended to equalize the weight borne by the 2 gun carriage wheels and the 2 wheels of the limber towing the gun, hence minimizing the weight borne by any single wheel. Its cradle was difficult to make. Mk2 Carriage had the usual field artillery wooden spoked wheels with iron tires. In February 1915, wartime manufacturing and maintenance requirements led to a simplification of the barrel construction, as gun Mk2 and Mk2 Mk2 Gun on Mk2 Carriage. Wartime manufacturing of the carriage was simplified in Mk2 by removing the provision to retract the gun for traveling. This moved most of the weight when traveling away from the limber onto the carriage's own wheels. Most weight was on the gun carriage wheels, rather than the limber wheels, and it was 1 ton heavier. 5 feet diameter by 1 foot wide steel traction engine wheels replaced the wooden wheels to cope with the added weight. The tractor wheels added more weight to be towed, requiring the use of Holt artillery tractors to replace horses. In early 1917, new brakes, a new cradle design, and calibrating sights were adopted. Mk2 Gun on Mk2 Carriage. The increased weight with the traction engine wheels made maneuvering difficult in typical mud conditions. In June 1916, the VIAF Commander General Haig requested a return to the lighter Mk2 Carriage. This was not possible, but retracting the gun back on its carriage for traveling was reintroduced in simplified form by disconnecting the barrel from the recoil system and locking it on the trail in the recoiled position. This reduced the weight by 900 weight. Wooden spoked wheels were reintroduced. This became the Mk2 Carriage, or Mk2 for converted Mk2 carriages. Mk2 Gun on Mk2 Carriage. The Mk2 Gun, introduced from 1918, had a longer barrel, new box trail carriage giving increased elevation to 35 degrees and cut-off gear to automatically reduce the recoil length from 54 to 24 inches, with increasing elevation. Hydro-pneumatic recoil system below the barrel. Single motion Asbury breech. It arrived too late to see service in the First World War and was effectively a new weapon. The gun was one of 2 types that could be carried by the gun carrier Mark I between the wars. After the First World War, the various types of heavy artillery were redesignated medium, heavy and super heavy, and these terms used to describe both the guns and in battery and brigade designations. 60-pounder was officially classed as medium. These terms had been used in various documents in that war but not in the official designations of batteries. 60-pounder remained unchanged except for carriage modifications to enable mechanization and new sights. Carriages were first the Mk2 carriage that had wooden wheels and solid rubber tires, and later the Mk2 carriage had metal wheels. Pneumatic pneumatic tyres and appropriate brakes. South Africa developed a new carriage of their own design from the Mk2. This used pneumatic-tyred wheels on a two-wheel bogie. Sights were changed, the calibrating type, initially to the number 9 carrier for the number 7 dial sight. This carrier had muzzle velocity corrector scale and an elevating arc below the sight mount. The arc was fitted with a choice of range scales depending on the ammunition being used. Subsequently, the number 14 carrier was issued. This was a probit pattern calibrating sight, the range scale plate being double-sided. 8 CRH shell full charge and reduced charge MKIXC on one side. On the other side for the 56 pounds shell. In the 1930s some carriages were converted to the new 4.5-inch BL ordnance to become BL 4.5-inch gun Mk2 on carriage 60PR Mark IV and IVP, which then started replacing 60-pounder. Second World War, 60-pounder was withdrawn from active service in 1941 but remained in training use until 1944. It was replaced by the BL 4.5-inch gun Mk2 on carriage 4.5-inch and 5.5-inch guns. Combat use. First World War. The 60-pounder Mk2 were formed into heavy batteries in the First World War, operated by the Royal Garrison Artillery and used mainly for counter-battery fire. When the First World War began, a single 4-gun battery was attached to each infantry division of the VIAF as available. Initial numbers restricted it to the regular divisions 1 to 6. Others were equipped with the obsolescent UF 4.7-inch gun. From early 1915, 60-pounder batteries moved from division to army control. As more 60-pounders became available, the 4.7-inch guns were retired. Writers such as General Farndale occasionally refer to 60-pounders as medium guns, but in the First World War they were officially referred to as heavy guns. From the 30th of June 1916, the War Office adopted Major General Berkshire's recommendations to increase heavy battery sizes to 6 guns, as more guns with better concentration of firepower were required on the Western Front, while minimizing the administrative overhead of more batteries. Batteries in the other minor theatres appear to have mostly retained a 4-gun structure. In the First World War, the Mk2 gun could fire the early 60 pounds 2 CRH shell 10,300 yards, and the later more streamlined 8 CRH shell to 12,300 yards. Weighing 4.4 tons, the 60-pounder required a team of 8 horses to tow it, with a maximum of 12 possible in difficult conditions. Mechanical towing by Holt tractors and later motor lorries took over from horses towards the end of the First World War. At the end of the war, no batteries were based within the United Kingdom. 74 batteries were in service with the VIAF on the Western Front, 3 in Italy, 11 in Macedonia, 7 in Palestine, and 4 in Mesopotamia. In addition, 2 Canadian batteries were active on the Western Front and were the only other force using the weapon. Post-First World War, 60-pounder remained in service during the interwar period and was used in Russia, Mesopotamia 1920 and 2021. During the Second World War they served with the VIAF in France and North Africa in medium regiments, by the South African Artillery in East Africa and by an Australian battery at Tobruk. Its last combat action was in the Western Desert. 19 were with the VIAF and lost in France, and total British holdings were expected to be 134 guns by August 1940, most being reconditioned or repaired guns. U.S. service. USA acquired some 60-pounders, presumably for evaluation, reported in its May 1920 Handbook of Artillery. The United States procured a number of batteries of 5-inch 60-pounder guns with the necessary accompanying vehicles from Great Britain. The materiel is of British design and manufacture throughout, and the units ceded to the United States include the gun Mark I, mounted on a carriage Mark II, the gun carriage limber Mark II, the ammunition wagon Mark II, and the ammunition wagon limber Mark II. The accompanying photograph in the manual depicts a Mk2 gun on Mk2 carriage with traction engine wheels typical of the Mk2 carriage, and the accompanying diagram depicts the gun in the forward traveling position typical of the Mk2 carriage mounting ammunition. At the beginning of the First World War, 60-pound ammunition scale was 70% shrapnel and 30% He. The standard shell was 2 CRH, but in 1917 an 8 CRH shell was adopted. Subsequently, after the First World War, a 56-pound 10 CRH shell to 15,200 yards was introduced. However, its He content was less than two-thirds that of the various 60-pound shells, and it was some 3 inches shorter. Shrapnel was also varied, with bullet weights ranging from 35 to 41 bullets pound and total loads varying from 616 to 992 bullets. Chemical shells were used with 60-pounder but not smoke or incendiary. World War I ammunition image gallery. Surviving examples. In museums: Imperial War Museum, London, Great Britain. Royal Canadian Artillery Museum, Shiloh, Manitoba, Canada. Polish Army Museum, Warsaw, Poland. Virginia War Museum, Newport News, Virginia, United States. National World War I Museum, Kansas City, Missouri, USA. Other surviving examples: Springfield, South Dakota. Mk2 gun stands at Terrace Park, Cairo, Illinois, stands on the grounds of the old Customs House. Rittman, Ohio, in the cemetery. Berkshire, Minnesota. Mk2 field gun stands in the center of Cannon Park, which is also at the center of the city of Berkshire. Bloomingdale, New Jersey. Mk1 field gun stands at the entrance of Sloan Park. Bibliography. History of the Ministry of Munitions, 1922. Volume 10, The Supply of Munitions. Facsimile reprint by Imperial War Museum and Naval and Amp Military Press, 2008. ISBN 1847348884-X. Dale Clark, British Artillery 1914–1919. Field Army Artillery, Osprey Publishing, Oxford, UK, 2004. ISBN 1841766887. Nigel F. Evans, Ordnance BL, 60 PR gun MKS2 or an AMP2 * on carriage 60 PR Mk4P. General Sir Martin Farndale, History of the Royal Regiment of Artillery, Western Front 1914–18. London, Royal Artillery Institution, 1986. ISBN 1870114000. Major General Sir John Headlam, The History of the Royal Artillery, From the Indian Mutiny to the Great War, Volume 2, 1899–1914, 1934. Facsimile reprint by Naval and Military Press, 2005. ISBN 9781845740436. IV Hogg and Amp, L.F. Thurston, British Artillery Weapons and Amp Ammunition 1914–1918. London, Ian Allen, 1972. Handbook of Artillery, including mobile, anti-aircraft and trench material. United States Army Ordnance Department, May 1920. Major General B.P. Hughes, History of the Royal Regiment of Artillery, Between the Wars 1919–39. London.